This program was previously recorded. Hello and welcome to Porter County Perspective. This is WDSO's News Director Nathan Bunning, and today I'm speaking with local author Dan Coffman. Dan has recently written a book called The Coming and has released several other books. Thanks for being with us today, Dan.
I'm glad to be here.
First, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
I was raised in Cleveland, Ohio. After earning a doctorate in earth science at Purdue University, I worked for a number of years as a crisis manager with a large multinational company. My wife and I have lived here in Chesterton for nearly 40 years. We have two grown children. And just as an aside, some people may recognize I'm the fellow for the last 20 years who's run a local wildflower nursery near my house called Trillium Woods.
When did you first realize you wanted to be a writer?
Well, because of my background, I've written extensive project reports and scientific papers most of my life. Quite frankly, it was only about 15 years ago that, mostly on a whim, just to see what it was like, I decided to try my hand at fiction writing.
What was the first book you published, and can you tell us about the process of getting your books published?
The very first book that I published was titled Tito Maita's Spider. It was about an ancient Indian boy who was responsible for creating the Nazca lines that are sort of infamous in Peru. In terms of getting published, it's really difficult for a new author to find a way to connect with the major publishing houses like, say, Random House, the people who do the large hardback books with the famous authors. So, like thousands of other people, I started out as what is called an indie author, which is short for independent. And what that means is I basically was responsible for publishing my own books. You do that by using a number of internet services. The most ubiquitous of those is Kindle at Amazon. And it allows you to take a Word document and upload it on their software and produce either an ebook or a book for print. And the nice thing about Kindle is it is free. Over the years, it has gotten easier and easier to use. The product, if you're producing a printed book, although it will be a softback and not a hardback, is equally as good as anything coming out of the major publishing houses today. The only thing I would say is if you're going to be an indie author, you really want to be careful to make sure that your work is edited by a professional before you go forward. And that will cost some money, and you're probably going to spend a little money for a book cover.
What authors do you like to read, and what books or books have had a strong influence on you or your writing?
I read suspense, mystery, and thrillers. That's been a lifelong love of mine, along with, I guess, detective stories. So the kind of authors that I pay attention to, common names are James Patterson, Robert Ludlum, Vince Flynn, and of course, Dan Brown. In terms of influencing the current book, The Coming, I would say the Da Vinci Code had the single greatest impact in what I chose to do there, based on how Dan Brown used factual material to enhance his story much more than other authors or even other books he's published.
How long does it typically take you to write a book?
Well, most of my books are the fables. They're about 10,000 words in length. And from the time I decide to do one until it actually is available to the public is typically a year. On the other hand, when you talk about a full-length novel like The Coming, that's 90,000 words, and I've been working on that for well over 5 years.
What is your writing process like? Do you set goals to write so much every day, or do you just wait until inspiration strikes?
That's an interesting question. I'm not earning a living as an author. I simply write for fun to please myself. As such, I have no goals. Sometimes I will go 1 to 2 months when other things are happening, like when I'm working in the nursery, and I won't do any writing at all. However, and what makes your question so interesting is for me personally, middle of the night inspiration has delivered most of the great surprises in either the fables or the novels that I've written. And so it is not unusual for me to crawl out of bed in the middle of the night and go to the computer and spend a couple hours there until I've played around with the inspiration that came to me.
How do you develop your plot and characters?
I was lucky enough to be tutored by 2 to 3 very good regional writers, and they're pretty adamant, and therefore, what I do is for a plot, before you ever try to write the book, you need to produce a synopsis. And that can be anything from 2 to 10 pages, and it needs to cover the entire book from the opening scene to the conclusion. I have found them, most people find them difficult to do, to put everything you intend to write down in something that short and yet cover everything that is important. The one comment I will make about um, a synopsis is that, particularly after you spend 4 more years producing the book, uh, I compare the final manuscript to the original synopsis, and it's only partially accurate by that time. When we talk about characters, one of the most valuable things I was instructed to do was to prepare a comprehensive biography of the 1 or 2 or 3 most important characters that you're imagining. And that biography may go on once again for 10 or 15 pages because it shouldn't be just little short notes. It should be pretty complete thoughts. And a biography is going to detail physical attributes, health conditions, family connections, marital status, children if that's appropriate, significant relatives, important friends, pets, education, where the person lives, their vocation, their hobbies, their favorite food, favorite entertainment, favorite places, and then some harder things, the things they hate the most, their ambitions, their nightmares, their secrets, their flaws, and obviously their dreams. So by the time you're done producing this biography, you've really come to know this character that maybe when you started only had a name.
Are any of the characters you've created been inspired by real people?
Not consciously. However, I've just mentioned the biographies, and I can't help but look back at some of them and realize that subconsciously I have included either characteristics or behaviors of people that I have known or worked with over time.
What genres do you typically write?
Well, as you might suspect from what I read, if I'm writing a novel, it's either a suspense thriller, or if I'm doing my fables, they are short stories. Typically, that's called a novella, and they tend always to end with an epiphany or some kind of a moral message.
What kind of research do you do, and how long do you spend researching before beginning a book?
My research is continuous, and quite frankly, it's why I like writing. I do about 2 to 4 hours of research for every written page in either a fable or a book. And the research is ongoing because as I am writing, I will take breaks and do a lot of work, usually internet searches, to make sure that I find facts or I test ideas I'm playing with to see what else is out there that might instruct me.
Have you ever traveled as research for your book?
Yes, I have. Just speaking about The Coming, which is the book that has just come out, I spent several weeks in Wisconsin where a lot of the book is, the action is taking place, simply scouting out and taking photographs and notes on areas where important scenes were going to happen. Also, with The Coming, one of the most interesting trips I took was to St. John's University, which is located in Collegeville, Minnesota. It's a tiny place, but they have a museum there that has what they call the Malta Study Center, and it is a historical collection of everything about the island of Malta and the Maltese knights that fought in the Crusades. And those characters had an important role to play in The Coming. So I got to do some fascinating research and talk to the people and get ideas from the folks who ran that center.
What can you tell us about your Verity fables?
Well, Verity Fables, as the name implies, are true lies. Um, most of the fables result from ideas I get when I'm researching a novel, but it turns out that the topic that I find fascinating isn't going to be used in the novel itself or not used fully as I understand it in the novel. And so I'll take a break sometimes from working on the major book, and I will produce at a minimum an outline and sometimes even the full scenario for a Verity fable that I will then conclude later. The one thing that I guess I'm proud of, you find that almost nothing is new or has not been done or tried before. But one of the hallmarks of my Verity fables is after the story is complete and you read the words "the end," there is one last section in which I document actual facts that have been used in and led me to be interested in this particular fable. And often one or more of those facts is a local legend uh, that was the beginning point for my telling the story.
Do you consider them more as a series or standalone books?
They're definitely not a series, they're quite independent. I try to make sure that, at least in my mind, each fable is a satisfying standalone read, even though they're short. The whole idea of fairy fables is you should read them or are able to read them in a half hour to an hour over a cup of coffee. However, since they are offshoots of things I've learned researching a book, a number of the fables are linked together because of the genesis being the same book I was working on.
What are some of the most interesting facts that you've come across during your research?
Well, of the questions you asked, that was absolutely, for me anyway, the easiest to answer. And it is the accomplishments of Nikola Tesla that stand out. I became fascinated with the man and his history and his mystery. For example, he spent a decade, and keep in mind he lived in the late 1800s, early 1900s. He spent a decade and every cent of what at the time was a pretty large fortune building a very weird structure that he called Wardenclyffe Tower on the East Coast. I wrote a fable about this, and yet to this day, no one honestly knows, because it was never put into operation, whether he intended to build the first international radio transmitter, whether this was a device to project free energy through the air all around the world, whether it was his attempt at interstellar, planet to planet communication, or some people think it was an exotic death ray that he could stop, or he thought could stop, all manner of international conflicts.
What would you like to tell listeners about your most recent book, The Coming?
Well, in sort of a comical way, I would ask you to imagine that Indiana Jones teamed up with Professor Robert Langdon to save Earth from Darth Vader. The plot of the book is a rather simplistic and standard one where aliens attack the Earth and a hero sets about saving the planet. Stories like this go back probably to a beginning with War of the Worlds in the late 1800s. They include many of the episodes of Star Trek and Star Wars. My personal favorite of this kind of story is the movie Independence Day. But The Coming differs from all of what I've just mentioned in that the reason that the aliens chose to attack Earth this time and the manner they go about doing it are very different, at least, than any of the thousands of similar stories that have been written. More importantly, I've intertwined many historical and contemporary facts with complete fictional illusion to make the plot what I call tantalizingly plausible. In other words, I worked very hard to make the reader believe that what is in The Coming, the events that they're reading about, could actually happen.
Can you tell us about some of the favorite books you have written?
Well, I haven't written that many, but I guess if you ask me of my favorites, it would be a fable again, and it is titled Abbot Jovik's Icons. And without going into a lot of detail, it tells about an ancient alien visitation, not an attack or an invasion, simply a visit to ancient Serbia that resulted in the Christian Orthodox Church placing a curse on the kingdom of Serbia and all of the people who lived there. This fable is a vignette that really became the inspiration for my writing the current book, The Coming.
Where can you find your books to purchase?
They're all available on Amazon. Most of them are only ebooks. They're Kindle books. Several of them, there are, like The Coming, there are printed versions.
Where can readers find out more about you and your books?
I'd really like them to go to my Facebook page. That page is titled Verity Fable. It's VERITYFABLE, one word. And when they get there, they're not only going to find a short, a listing of all the books and a short write-up about them, but in many cases, especially for The Coming, they're going to find a number of posts that talk about background issues in the book in a manner that you will not find by just reading the book alone.
Do you have any ideas you're interested in pursuing for future books?
As a matter of fact, I am writing at this moment a sequel to The Coming. That sequel will introduce the reader to the alien planet Euthoria and its inhabitants. Euthoria houses the oldest civilization in the universe. And at least what I'm playing with at the moment in this book, despite the continuing conflict between that planet and Earth, is a romance between an Earthling and a Euthorian, which will be complicated by the kind of societal problems depicted in the West Side Story, which, for those who may not know anything about that, was simply a play and eventually a movie based on the ideas of Romeo and Juliet. So it's going to take me another year or two, but I hope to have that out for people who enjoy the current novel.
What about something set in Northwest Indiana? Are there any local fables you've ever considered pursuing?
I guess the simple answer to that is no. I really haven't explored any local myths, but I can tell you from having lived here for 40 years that were I to do that and start to research it, I'm sure I would set that fable back in the times of the early pioneer exploration of this wonderful area of Porter County. And so it would probably be something about the leather stockings explorers meeting the native Indians of the area. But beyond that, no, I really haven't done any work in that area.
What advice do you have for aspiring writers?
Well, that would be easy because I tell you to do things I never did when I should have. Take every good grammar course and writing class that is available to you in high school and if you go on to college. Whether or not you decide to pursue the writing arts in college, but you still want to write books, then join a writers club. There are a number of them locally. In fact, join 2 writers clubs and practice, practice, practice. What I would tell anyone who is aspiring to write is you need to learn early on to both give and accept critical, constructive suggestion and do it without ever taking offense, because you're not going to get good at the art without having listened to people who take something you have delighted in producing and show you all the ways that it comes up short.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell listeners about your books or any other projects you're working on right now?
Well, neither of those two things, but if I could leave you with one last thought, because of the digital age we are in, it is much easier for anyone who chooses to write something to actually bring a final product to the market. And as such, there are thousands, if not tens of thousands of books coming to the market every year. Uh, that makes it difficult for any new or unproven author to garner an audience. And so, what I'd like to leave anyone who's listening to this with as a thought is if they pick up a book and read it and like it, the greatest favor they can do to the person who wrote it is to take just a moment and go to Amazon and leave a brief, kind review about the book. That's a big help to any would-be author.
Okay, that's going to be it for this week's edition of Porter County Perspective. My guest this week was Dan Coffman. Thank you again for talking with me today, Dan.
I'm pleased to do it. Thank you for the opportunity.
This has been Nathan Bunning signing off. This program was previously recorded.